The banknotes we carry in our pockets today seem completely ordinary to us. We take it for granted that money can be made of paper. But over 1,000 years ago, no society dared to imagine such a thing. People believed that money's value was tied to metal. If gold shone, there was trust. If silver was heavy, the state was strong. No one could have imagined that value could exist in something invisible, backed only by a promise. Until China took the step that would change the course of history. The paper money revolution reshaped not just the economy, but the very way states wielded power. It all began during the Song dynasty. In 10th century China, the economy was growing at an astonishing rate. Agriculture was expanding, cities were thriving, and trade routes were bustling. But this growth brought a hidden problem. There was not enough money. The copper coins used at the time were no longer sufficient for the volume of trade. On top of that, they were heavy, making transportation a cumbersome burden. Imagine a merchant making a large purchase, carrying kilograms of metal coins. It was dangerous and unwieldy. And it was at this precise moment that merchants in Sichuan and other trade centers began experimenting with a revolutionary idea. Merchants started leaving their heavy copper coins at trusted shops and receiving in return a piece of paper indicating the amount to receive. This paper served as a receipt, representing a specific quantity of actual currency. Today, we might recognize this as the earliest version of a banknote. At first, these papers were simply convenient. People carried receipts instead of heavy coins, and they could redeem them later for real money. But unknowingly, a new era in human history had begun. Soon, merchants started passing these receipts to one another. The paper itself began to act as money. Value was quietly shifting from metal to paper. The state noticed this change, and though everyone was surprised, one thing was clear: trade was moving faster with paper. The government initially formalized the system, and soon the authority to print money was fully under state control. Whoever controlled money controlled power. By the early 11th century, China issued the world's first official paper money. These notes were called jiaozi. Initially, they were valid for a limited time, and each note carried a state-backed promise. This piece of paper represents a certain value. As people began to trust this promise, paper money became the driving force of the economy. But the story didn't end there. With this new power in its hands, the government could either strengthen the empire or bring the entire system to ruin. Officials during the Song dynasty were cautious at first, but as paper money became widely popular, the amount in circulation grew rapidly. The result? One of history's first large-scale inflation experiences. People realized that as the money supply increased, its value decreased. The power of paper was undeniable, but so was its danger. When the government lost balance, prices soared and public trust faltered. Yet paper money never disappeared. Trade had already adapted to the new system. Even with the fall of the Song dynasty, the paper money story continued. When the Mongols conquered China, the system remained in use. Under Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty, paper money became mandatory. Everyone had to use it. This was both a tremendous innovation and a significant risk. To finance a vast empire, enormous quantities of paper money were printed, inevitably triggering another wave of high inflation. This period taught a critical lesson. Paper money was a powerful tool. If used correctly, it enriched an empire. If mismanaged, it could accelerate collapse. The spread of paper money beyond China is equally fascinating. In the 13th century, Marco Polo arrived in China and could hardly believe what he saw. In Europe, people were still dealing with gold and silver, while in China, state-backed banknotes had been in use for decades. Polo wrote about this in his travel accounts, and Europeans initially dismissed it as fantasy. The idea that paper could sustain an entire empire seemed impossible. Yet, as trade routes expanded, the concept gradually gained interest in Europe. When Europeans eventually adopted paper money, they too experienced similar mistakes that China had encountered centuries earlier: overprinting, loss of trust, and economic fluctuations. History was repeating itself because every state drawn to this new power fell into the same trap. Today, modern economies still rely on the revolution that began in China. Banknotes, central bank policies, and the money supply all trace their origins back to that pivotal moment. When people first began to trust in value that was not tangible, an empire was fundamentally transformed. Paper money was not just an economic innovation, it reshaped the way governments operated, accelerated trade, and changed societies. It was more than a financial innovation. It redefined power itself. What is even more remarkable is that the rise of digital currencies today marks the beginning of a new era. But the roots of the story are far older. Human beings began to trust in an invisible form of value through paper money. There was no metal, no gold, nothing tangible. But society, accepting the state's promise, created a shared standard of value. The Chinese paper money revolution remains one of history's quietest yet most powerful transformations. And it all began with an idea that seemed insignificant at the time, that value could exist simply as a promise on a piece of paper.